On June 17th of this year, Wizards of the Coast D&D team put out a statement entitled Diversity in Dungeons & Dragons. Now, it's too long to read here, but it's short enough to summarize. The first two paragraphs are a statement of their intent to increase diversity and inclusivity in upcoming D&D products. The next two paragraphs address the idea of inherently evil races in Dungeons & Dragons and why that idea is dangerous. They go on to say that reprints of older modules will be scrubbed of racially insensitive material and less emphasis will be placed on race by introducing more flexibility into racial bonuses. The Vistani, who are an analog of the real-life Romani people, will now be more than an unfortunate racial stereotype. And lastly, they talk about increasing diversity in their workplace. The online reaction to this has been mixed and seems to be largely determined by generation. A link to this article was posted in the 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons group, where it was met mostly with a positive response. In the 1st edition Dungeons & Dragons group, it was met with almost universal contempt. So let me just put my cards on the table. I not only agree with Wizards of the Coast, but I want to drill down on some of the ideas they expressed in that letter. Because some of you don't get it, and maybe I can help. I can feel like a lot of you right now are ready to stop this video, unsubscribe, and leave a comment like,
"Why do you SJW libcucks have to ruin everything with your race-baiting leftist agenda? Dwarves and halflings aren't real, can't you just enjoy the make-believe fairy tale game and shut the hell up?"
So let me respond to that with a clarification that I'm not here to tear something down that's been a huge part of my entire life. I'm not trying to attack or impugn the character of the creators or the players of Dungeons & Dragons. I'm not a pink-haired college student looking for something to get angry about. D&D is a huge part of who I am. At age 7, I wanted to marry Sheila from the Dungeons & Dragons cartoon. At age 12, I started reading fantasy and playing D&D. At 18, I got a tattoo of a wizard casting a fireball on my left forearm. I've collected hundreds of Dragon magazines, thousands of dollars on books and miniatures. I've played every single edition of the game, and I frequent gaming conventions. Oh, and I have a YouTube channel with 150 videos about Dungeons & Dragons. And as a true fan, I can tell you that there are some unfortunate ideas regarding race in this game. Ideas that I was exposed to at a very young age. Don't get me wrong, I think D&D is a great game for children. But when the books and the dice are put away, it might be good for parents to take 10 minutes to talk to their kids about how the game handles the concept of race. Just to make sure they aren't absorbing those ideas at face value. Just to make sure they understand that the concept of an evil race is just as much a product of make-believe as Melf's acid arrow. Biological determinism, or biodeterminism, was an idea put forward in the 18th century. Those who subscribed to it believed that a person's genetics were more responsible for who they became than their environment they were raised in. It became the foundation for eugenics.
"We mustn't let criminals breed, for they will surely give birth to criminal babies. Criminal babies will make our dreams come true."
Biological determinism is fine for arthropods and mollusks. A cockroach can be born in a tank or a toilet or a cereal box and then released into the wild, and it'll immediately go about the business of being a cockroach as if it were born in the wild. Unless it has a poli-sci degree, in which case it'll probably start a YouTube channel and pray for the best. But as you start to scale up the size of an animal's brain, you begin to find regions set aside for abstract thought. Unlike insects, mammals are not creatures of pure instinct. Learning and adaptation are necessary for mammals to survive. Mammals raised in captivity can't survive in the wild. They have all the same instincts, but they don't have the necessary experience. Cats are alpha predators. You can see it in their play. They hide in ambush and then leap on one another. They instinctively chase a string or a laser pointer. They love lasagna. But they still must be taught to hunt and kill prey by their mothers. The more advanced the brain, the more a mammal relies on learned information instead of instinct. Primates have a much longer childhood than most mammals because it takes time to learn that complex social structure that they live in. Primates, and humans especially, don't rely on instincts to tell them how to survive. What they have instead is culture. It's your culture and not your genetics that determine how you act. Vikings were not an instinctively aggressive and marauding people. It's not like they were bullet ants with battle axes. They adopted a culture of looting in order to survive. And that culture had to be taught to every Viking child. If violence and looting were a genetic trait, you'd still see it today in modern Sweden, and I've yet to see an IKEA dresser delivered on a longboat full of raiders. I know most of you didn't need to have the idea of biodeterminism debunked, but I wanted to underline how toxic and reductive it is before I point out the fact that it's a big part of Dungeons & Dragons. When Gary Gygax created the game, he wanted humans to be front and center, and that meant non-human characters didn't have the same potential as human ones. In every edition of the game before 3rd, there were very harsh level restrictions for non-humans. Some races just couldn't be certain classes. In basic D&D, race was such an important factor that it replaced character class for non-humans. What you could do with those characters was defined completely by the race of those characters.
I would like to become a paladin.
What did you say?
I want to be a paladin.
Well, you can't, I'm sorry.
Why not?
Because you're an elf.
Why is that a problem?
Paladin has to be able to fight and wield divine magic at the same time.
I'd like you to meet my father, the fighter cleric of Corellian. Father, tell them, do you wield divine magic and fight at the same time?
Every day.
Well, there you have it.
Okay, but we can't just have anyone becoming a paladin. I mean, it's a very exclusive class.
So elves aren't good enough?
No, I mean, it's not that.
It's your ears!
Right. Your ears are too pointy to fit in their special paladin helmets. Every paladin has to wear. They're designed for very round ears, and in fact, some humans have ears that are too pointy for the special paladin helmet.
Can I try it on?
No, it's only for paladins.
I could have my ears surgically altered.
You could do that, but
You live too long.
That's right. You live too long to be a paladin because Paladin Retirement Fund kicks in at age 65, and you're already
207.
Yeah, so you'd be tapping into the retirement fund, and you haven't even put any money into it, and it's only supposed to last for about 4 years at the most. You'll be using it for what, 800 years or so?
So I can't just opt out of the retirement plan?
No, union rules, I'm afraid. We fought hard for that one. Every paladin must get a retirement fund at 65. And if we budge on that, we may have to renegotiate later, so it's just the whole thing, I'm sorry.
Okay, I see how it is.
Talk about an uppity elf, huh? They think they can come here and take our jobs. Stick to making cookies, you friggin' Keebler.
It's hard to imagine Dungeons & Dragons without evil races of people. The monster manual is filled with them. Dungeons & Dragons is often a game of good versus evil, and very often that reads as good races versus evil races. And the good races are mostly fair-skinned, craftsmen, metropolitan, and wealthy. And the evil races are mostly tribal, have darker skin, are animalistic, low-tech, and poor. We all know that dark skin, being primitive, tribal, and poor are not character flaws, just as being wealthy and metropolitan and technically savvy are not virtues. You can have a heart of gold and still be a poor tribal person, and you can be a very wealthy metropolitan monster. But time and again, Dungeons & Dragons tells us otherwise. The skin color of evil races comes about in two ways, either naturally or as the result of corruption by an evil outside force. The corrupted elves have black skin. The corrupted dwarves have dark gray skin. And corrupted humans, known as Grimlocks, also have dark gray skin. The idea of a supernatural power corrupting a race and making them darker isn't unique to Dungeons & Dragons. It can be found in the works of Tolkien, whose orcs were corrupted elves. But there's an even earlier conception of this idea here in the real world. You can also see it here in this cartoon detailing Mormon beliefs. Sorry for the low resolution on this, I couldn't find a better copy.
Thus Lucifer became the devil, and his followers the demons. Sent to this world, they would forever be denied bodies of flesh and bone. Those who remained neutral in the battle were cursed to be born with black skin. This is the Mormon explanation for the Negro race. The spirits that fought most valiantly against Lucifer would be born into Mormon families on planet Earth. These would be the lighter-skinned people, or white and delightsome, as the Book of Mormon describes them.
Other races that were not corrupted but are still naturally evil are the orcs, who range from olive green to black. Hobgoblins are red, bugbears are brown. In spite of the trend towards more diversity, D&D still mostly depicts the good races, halfling elves, dwarves, and gnomes, as fair-skinned. While the races that are truly hybrids of human and animal, like the Aarakocra and Turtles and Lizardmen, Dragonborn and Tabaxi, they tend to be neutral or good, because people love real animals. The uncorrupted evil races, they tend to be more bestial in very specific ways. They live in various tribes, presenting physical characteristics that are more or less hideous. Almost without exception, they live in a not merely barbarous, but superlatively savage state. I'm sorry, that's not from the Monster Manual. Did you think I was describing orcs? Nope, it's from this book, Types of Mankind by Josiah C. Knott. And he's talking about tribal African people. Published in 1857, but racist stereotypes about black people haven't changed a bit. Every broad racist stereotype about black people, that they're angry, they're violent, lazy, brutish, intellectually inferior, that description perfectly fits orcs, goblins, bugbears, gnolls, bullywugs, and a dozen others. I'm not here to cry about racism in a fantasy game, but this stuff has become a vector for actual online hate directed towards the most vulnerable people on Earth. This is orc posting. And orc posting is the sharing of humorous memes wherein a cannibalistic slave race of savage beastmen are compared to people fleeing war and oppression. Again, I want to state very clearly that I don't want to lay the blame on Gary Gygax or anyone involved with the creation of Dungeons & Dragons for this. I think Gary was probably as woke as any white Wisconsinite born in 1938. But his game was modeled after fantasy fiction, a genre which is rife with evil races. And I'm also not blaming authors like Tolkien because they were modeling their work after fairy tales and folk tales. And those tales started as oral traditions that stretched so far into prehistory it would be ridiculous to try to point fingers. But fantasy literature didn't originate in a particularly enlightened time, and the line between fictional monster men and racist stereotypes is blurrier than Bigfoot in the Witness Protection Program. Tolkien said in a private letter that orcs were squat, broad, flat-nosed, sallow-skinned, and with wide mouths and slant eyes, in fact, degraded and repulsive versions of the least lovely Mongol types. I want to hammer that point home a little bit more. These are Peter Jackson's orcs. And these are Peter Jackson's Africans. Can you spot the difference? If you said that the orcs were a little more civilized, you'd be right. In the film 300, the Persians are so grossly caricatured, they actually become creatures of fantasy. They're led by a giant. The immortals are hobgoblins. And here's an ogre. Here's a mini-boss from Diablo. One difference, the Persians are the more technologically advanced race. But remember, the conceit of the film is that none of these other advancements are worth anything. The Spartans mock their fellow Greeks for pursuing poetry and pottery. The film hammers home the idea that the only advancement that matters is warcraft, and in that arena the Spartans are supreme. They're also supreme in painting lines on their tummy tom. That's pretty important too. This kind of thing can even be done in reverse. In the book The 13th Warrior, the fantasy epic of Beowulf is reimagined as a historical account as told by a Muslim kidnapped by Vikings. For most of the book, the story mirrors the original until we get to the end where the monstrous antagonists of the dragon, the giant Grendel and his mother, are replaced by a tribe of savage brown-skinned cannibals. We know the good guys are good because they possess the virtues of intelligence and the drive to become excellent craftsmen, and they have access to the best weapons and armors of the game. That's also the kind of thinking that Europeans have historically used to justify genocide on 5 continents. And it's reflected in the literature from the colonial period, too. The stories of Allan Quatermain and in contemporary books like The Gorilla Hunters, great white hunters would use their wits and superior weaponry to rescue women from savage tribesmen. It really isn't hard to see D&D through the lens of a colonial narrative. Our fair-skinned heroes journey far to get to a hostile alien land. They navigate the perils of this hostile land, and they have to overcome the native savages using their superior weapons and resources. And the ultimate goal is to loot as much treasure as possible. D&D tells us that craftsmanship and engineering correlate with morality. The finest swords and armor are made by dwarves and elves, and goblinoids' weapons are rusty kitchen knives and leg bones. I don't know, garbage. The goblin's nature makes higher morality difficult. And in colonial times, that argument was used to justify slavery also. You see, blacks were too savage to be saved. So if they were enslaved, they could finally learn about Jesus and know the right name to cry out when they were being whipped for not picking enough cotton. These are the Zoe people. They may be the most low-tech people on Earth, but they aren't cannibals or savages. In fact, they live a very egalitarian lifestyle where every voice is heard before the tribe makes any decision for the group as a whole. They have no carbon footprint and they've never known war. On the other hand, in 1942, Germany was arguably the most scientifically advanced nation on Earth. They had advanced rocketry and superior submarines and tanks, which they used to kill Tom Hanks. They have an early computer by IBM, which they used to aid them in their genocide of 6 million Jews. Now you tell me which culture is good and which culture is evil. No, seriously, leave a comment below. I had a brain hemorrhage for lunch. I smell burned metal. I don't want to single out white people. Seeing other cultures and peoples as monsters is universal. When tribal storytellers sit down in front of the fire, they tell the stories of who they are, not just as individuals, but as people. And one of the ways they do that is by defining who they are not. And this is called othering. The Bantu and the Inuit translates literally to the people. The Inuit and Bantu named themselves the people because the implication is, historically, that everyone else is a little bit less. When the Spanish landed in South America, the natives saw them on their horses and they believed that they were centaurs. Anti-Semites once believed that Jews had horns and tails like devils. Every tribe has a story of a lost tribe that committed taboos and were transformed into monstrous beings by the gods. Native Americans believed cannibalism turned men into the Wendigo. But every culture has some kind of ogre, or goblin, or little trickster people. And I genuinely believe that some of these stories can be traced back to a time when 7 different types of human ancestor coexisted. What would early hominids think of Neanderthals? What stories would be spun about the actual Hobbit people that inhabited the same lands as our ancestors? What we think of as mythology may actually just be bigotry from the past. And that brings us back around to Wizards of the Coast statement. Wizards is acknowledging that too much of Dungeons & Dragons hangs on biological determinism. And I think a lot of adults are cognizant of that on some level. But for a lot of us, our hobbies are our escape, and we don't want to think critically about the things that make us happy. If your kids play the game, make sure they understand that tribal people aren't inherently evil. And if you're going to call me a libtard or an SJW in the comments, ask yourself why your game needs subhuman races to commit genocide against. Maybe D&D is a healthy outlet for racial hate, I don't know. But surely your DM can use other antagonists like undead, spirits, demons, interdimensional beings, constructs, beasts, monsters, giant insects, and even humanoids whose motivations conflict with the party's, but are not the result of evil in their DNA. If the evil is in the genes, then genocide is justified. And I don't think Wizards of the Coast wants to be in the business of justifying genocide, even in a game of make-pretend. Hey guys, thanks for watching this one. I understand I hadn't made a video in a long time, and this may turn a lot of you off to the channel. Sorry, I had to talk about it. If you did like the video, please like and subscribe. If you didn't like it and want to disagree with me, go ahead and leave a comment. We can get into it. If you'd like to support the channel, please consider donating to my GoFundMe in the description below. And check us out on our Facebook page. It's a great way to see other projects, what's coming up, stay in touch with me, and all kinds of other things. So, thanks a bunch, guys. We'll see you soon on Miniature Mashup.